It's popped up quite a lot in this morning's conversations. Some days we go for as long as an hour and 11 minutes without mentioning the B word, but not today, not when you're discussing the skip fire that Dominic Cummings sought to ignite last night. It's impossible to conduct that conversation. And today attention returns to Northern Ireland, where, well, I tell you what, for once I'll spare you one of my torturous explanations and hand over instead to a much better qualified contributor. Peter Foster is the public policy editor of the Financial Times. He's also the author of their rather splendid weekly Brexit briefing. So the polar opposite, if you like, of people saying, oh, let's just stop talking about it now and pretend it never happened. And here we are. Lord Frost, back in the chair today, Pete. Give us an idiot's guide. And obviously in this exchange, I'll be the idiot.
So, the listeners may remember that we did this Northern Irish Protocol, which, going right back to first principles, James, was designed to avoid a return to a north-south border in Ireland. And in order for that to happen, we agreed that all of the goods, particularly also agri-food goods, all the supermarket products that go from Great Britain into Northern Ireland should have checks at the Irish Sea border. That's what we agreed in order to have no north-south border. 6 months on, it turns out that the checks are much more onerous than we appreciated, according to Lord Frost, and have done much more damage to our ability to trade freely. And remember, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom, and it is now in the regulatory orbit of a foreign trade power. That upsets the unionists. And remember that the unionists and the nationalists have equal right to feel their own constitutional reality. And so Lord Frost today is going to propose an alternative, which is going to mean much less checks at the border in the Irish Sea. But I suspect it's going to upset the EU a lot, who are still in the position that, we made this deal back in late 2019, and we should stick to it.
The phrase honesty box appears in your copy this morning, which I've only ever encountered in seaside B&Bs, where you help yourself to the scotch after the owner has gone to bed and leave a few quid in the honesty box. How does it work in this context?
Well, so at the moment, all of those goods, loads of supermarket goods, need full checks before they go into Northern Ireland. And so what the Brits are proposing is, look, when we know goods are going into Northern Ireland, there's no risk of them going into the south, into the single market. Why don't we just have a system where, this is what I've been led to believe, where if a company says, look, this is only for Northern Ireland, then it shouldn't need all of those checks that the EU say it needs, right? And remember, we're talking, the boss of Marks and Spencer was on the radio this morning saying, he has wagons, loads of goods that are stuck in the dock because of some error with the SBS paperwork. And this SBS paperwork, that's the phytosanitary, that's all the controls on things like chicken and sausages and anything that's got plant. It is incredibly onerous. It's designed for container loads of stuff from the rest of the world, and it's being applied to this very high frequency border that is an internal border of the United Kingdom, to be fair to Lord Frost. It is incredibly onerous. It takes 8 pieces of paper to get a piece of cheese from Birmingham to Belfast now. And there is no doubt when you talk to the trade groups that they find it, incredibly onerous. I think there is somewhere, James, a middle line between the UK...
That was my next question. But before you do that, what is the initial reaction of the EU likely to be today? And you're right to be fair to Lord Frost, but it's also right to point out he negotiated and signed this deal, and they are now arguing, or he is now seeking to disown. Is that too strong a word, to disown what he settled on?
So the EU have said, look, we'll tinker around the edges, we can do flexibilities, but the core of the protocol, which is this basic rule that all the goods going from GB into Northern Ireland follow EU rules, and the rules are listed, James, in the annexes to the protocol. Reams and reams of rules, right? And we agreed all of that. And so the EU is going to say, look, these proposals, I suspect, when they look at them, they're going to say these proposals are really not commensurate with that core of the protocol. It's worth remembering that David Frost, he negotiated this protocol, but he also negotiated the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which is a very, very basic Canada deal. So by doing a very basic deal, that puts loads more friction onto that border in the Irish Sea, because one of the things the EU have said, look, you're not going to do a trade deal with the United States anytime soon. You've done a trade deal with Australia, but you can actually do a veterinary deal with us. You agree to align with the EU standards, and actually most of these checks will go away. Now, for, the reasons we all know, divergence, freedom, sovereignty. Yeah, Lord Frost isn't going to do that. Right. So then the next question is, well, can you do a kind of deal in the middle? And this, I think, is one bit that's not totally clear whether the gambit here, the game here, is to force the EU into taking a much more flexible approach towards trusted traders to really reduce the level of checks at the border, or whether the gambit here is actually just to put the EU in a position where they just say, look, we really can't do with this, and then they'll trigger Article 16, which Lord Frost and the paper will say, the bar has already been. So there's a safeguard clause in the protocol, James, called Article 16, where if you can show there's been what they call diversion of trade, disruption to the economy, then you can trigger Article 16 in order to fix those narrow issues. It's not blowing up the protocol, but it allows you to fix those. Now, Lord Frost is going to argue, we've already reached that point. We're not going to trigger it now because we want to give you, Brussels, time to rethink this. But we've already reached a point where, Marks and Spencer's are cancelling lines for Christmas this Christmas. So, I mean, there is a real problem here because you're right that, Lord Frost signed this deal. He then made it harder to implement by doing a very, very, in my view, unnecessarily diamond-hard trade deal, which has benefited no one, really. But the Good Friday Agreement is important. The unique circumstance of Northern Ireland are important. So that, for example, the head of the National Farmers Union in Ulster, Victor Chestnut, was talking to a select committee this week, and he's saying, the EU is already making new rules and regulations which we have to follow, and we have no say over them. And so you can see why, from a unionist perspective, that's pretty unacceptable.
Of course.
But you know what? One thing you can't say is that any of this was unforeseen.
Well,
people
yes.
like me have been writing about it for a long time.
Far be it from either of us to issue the dread words "I told you so." But I think perhaps the key phrase, regulatory alignment or regulatory orbit, they both remain the biggest obstacle of all, isn't it? Because you cannot have on the island of Ireland two separate regulatory regimes without any checks being conducted between them. That was true even when people like Jacob Rees-Mogg were swearing blind it wasn't, and it's still true now after signing both of these treaties.
No, indeed. I mean, one of the things the Brits will say, well, look, what's the actual risk to the single market here? Why can't we have, let's say for sake of argument, we do a trade deal and we agree to have chlorine-washed chicken for the United States. Why can we not have chlorine-washed chicken floating around Northern Ireland, because all citizens of the United Kingdom should enjoy the benefits of chlorine-washed chicken? Why should it not be floating around Northern Ireland, as long as it's got a big fat label on it saying Northern Ireland only? And then if it leaks into the single market and appears in Dublin, then what they call market surveillance, so the trading standards will pick up on it. Now the EU will say, look, that's completely impractical because a lot of the stuff that leaks into the into the kebab vans and the chip shops. It's not going to be sitting in the supermarket shelf. And then they'll say, and if that starts to happen, what's the legal basis on which we can seek redress? The Brits are asking us to kind of trust them massively. And so it's a very long and cumbersome process. And that's not what we agreed. We agreed that we would avoid this north-south trade border. And I think in a more trusting environment, James, there probably are middle ground solutions here. But I can't overstate to you how fed up they are in Brussels, in Paris, in Berlin by the way we're behaving. They think we're behaving like gangsters, frankly.
Peter Foster, public policy editor at the Financial Times. You came in bang on time as well. We'll make a broadcaster out of you yet, Pete. Great stuff, mate. Thank you ever so much. And his weekly Brexit briefing is, well, if you want to know what's going on, it's required reading. If you're still clinging to the carcass of this whole shebang being a good idea, then I'd advise you to avoid it like the plague, because knowledge is your enemy and understanding is not your friend.